Get ready for an adventure-filled episode of Prairie Sportsman as we head to the Red Lake Nation for some hard-fighting largemouth bass action. We'll also be learning about the research being done on plants that could help absorb excess road salts, which could have negative impacts on local ecosystems. And we'll join Nicole Zempel for a fast forage. Welcome to Prairie Sportsman. I'm Brett Amundson. We got a great show lined up for you, and it starts right now.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, and by Mark and Margaret Yackel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org, and by Live Wide Open, Western Minnesota Prairie Waters, and the members of Pioneer PBS.
Driving north through Minnesota, you see a lot of the same familiar sights, and so many fishing trips begin this way. But our destination is not your typical fishing destination in Minnesota. In fact, as a Minnesotan, I need to buy what is essentially a non-resident license to fish here.
Today I'll be jumping in the boat with Darwin Sumner, along with Dan Amundson and my brother Wade Amundson.
Okay, we're heading to the wilderness here in Red Lake. Let's go try for some crappies, some bluegills, and do some bass fishing.
I feel like it's always an adventure getting back to these lakes up here, Darwin.
Yeah, this road here, if some days when it's really muddy here, I'll just get in that rut there and fall asleep, take a nap till we get to the lake, and takes us right to the lake. Pretty rough roads. Nobody comes back here a lot, so makes it, better fishing back in our lakes and the waters. We got about 40 lakes back in the wilderness area of Red Lake Indian Reservation, and roads are all like this.
After surviving the road, we decided to start off by looking for some big panfish.
Bluegills and crappies are out here in about 14 feet of water, suspended right now.
You get one?
I don't know what I get, probably a big bluegill.
Looks like he's spinning. Nice bluegill.
Nice little chunker. It's a crappie.
I think it's a bluegill.
Okay.
I haven't seen it yet, though. Yeah, based on the way it was fighting, not bad at all. On the rod my dad made me.
Nice.
That's a good one.
Small guy.
Fish.
Small guy.
Feels a little more sun-like. Bluegill. Jig is almost a little too light.
He's a nice little
guy.
He probably runs about 8, I would say. Oh, what do we got here? It's like one of them little tanks again.
Some nice one there, yeah.
4-inch gulp. Quarter-ounce jig with a 4-inch gulp, but he's hammering him.
With the wind picking up, we're using an oversized presentation to get down to the fish. 1/4-ounce jigs and 4-inch plastics. But it's not phasing these big bluegills.
Tell me how these lakes are managed here on the reservation.
We got a tribal DNR that manages all the lakes and tests the water clarity And the law enforcement, they go around, check the lakes, make sure everybody's, following the limits and stuff. This year we had to put a limit on the crappies and the bluegills.
We lowered the limit.
Yeah, lowered the limit because we're getting a lot more people fishing and they're getting more proficient at catching fish. We put the limits down to 5 each on the crappies and the bluegills. And the bluegills, they can keep 1 over 8 in that limit of 5. Ooh, there's a nice one. Hopefully that's one. Oh, that's a
good fish.
Chunker.
Oh, yeah.
So ones like that, they're, I don't know if that's about a what? Over 8?
Yeah. Sure.
Everybody come on a half ounce jig.
And lowering the limits on these panfish, it's the same thing that's happening around the state of Minnesota
Right,
too,
yep.
as fishing is getting better, and you don't need to keep a ton of these to get a good fish fry out of them anyway. So get a couple for a meal, put the rest back, like I'm gonna do with that one right there, and let it grow bigger so we can keep catching these big ones. There's some big fish in here.
There's some really nice fish in here.
Managing the pressure and reducing limits, that's how you keep a fishery sustainable and healthy. And for someone like us to come and do this, we have to buy is it a non-resident or non-reservation tag?
It's a reservation permit, yeah.
Okay.
And you got daily permits and you got 3-day permits.
What do you do?
But you got seasonal permits too, which is for non-members, it's $50 a season or $10 a day.
And then you have to hire a guide.
Yep, got to be with a guide.
Well, that's a nice fish. Oh yeah, look at that one.
Here's what's out here.
Oh.
Sunfish.
Holy
I
Darwin.
don't think I've ever seen one that big.
Jeepers.
Anytime you catch big bluegills that hit double digits, it's a good day. But we weren't done yet.
See how that grass comes out there, that floating stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. When it's sunny like this, the bass will just go camp right under there. Oh, there he is. Got it.
Ah, I missed him. Doggone it.
And let it sit for a little longer.
Yeah. Oh, are you kidding me? Ah, cannot keep them hooked. Doggone it.
Darwin let us have the first crack at bass, but after a dry spell, it was time for him to grab the rod.
I've seen enough.
We're watching the rookies.
I just gotta see if there's any out here.
And it didn't take him long to show us how it's done.
Okay. Oh, there. Is that northern?
Oh, no. It is. Oh, that's a nice fish.
Nice little bass.
Chunky.
One of them little Strike King Zeros, I believe that's called.
And he hit that 3 times?
Three times.
You think
before.
that? You think he had him
I
on?
muffed the first.
Yeah, had him on. Cast back out there. He hit it, missed it, and then he hit it again. He's fat.
Yeah. Been eating these bluegills here. All these isolated pads have a bunch of bluegills on them. We've been hearing them.
Hold on tight.
He's coming. He's coming.
You got him.
Come on out of there.
So we were using frogs, and then Darwin had to show us he could catch fish. So he caught one on a worm.
I have a better color, right?
And then he switched to the frog and caught one on a frog too.
First cast.
So
So,
obviously we're doing something wrong. Nice fish.
yeah, that's not bad.
Get him! Oh no! Oh, he still got him. There you go, Wade. Nice.
Where's the net guy?
thinking that
Nice.
guy for that one.
That way. What did you switch to, Wade? Jig and a plastic?
Yep.
Nice.
Not a bad little fish, eh? Say, Dad's old reel comes through again.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So while I got to fish with a rod my dad built, Wade was fishing with a reel that also had connections to our dad.
It was a reel that your grandfather won in a Bassmasters bass tournament when we lived down in Nevada, Missouri, like in 1977 or 1978.
There you go. Clearly, the Tribal DNR is doing something right and making the Red Lake Nation a fantastic destination for all anglers.
We've been salting for perhaps more than 50 years, and there's a consequence to that salt loading to our lives. Sodium chloride, once it's in solution, nothing stops it. It goes into the ground, it just moves.
That is the work of a weevil. So if you see acorns that do have these holes or cracks, you just want to toss those aside.
Salt saves lives. When applied to icy roads in the winter, sodium chloride prevents cars and trucks from skidding off the road or into traffic. Salt can also be deadly. When sodium chloride seeps into groundwater and makes its way to lakes and streams, it harms fish and other aquatic life, and it's impossible to remove. But what if plants could absorb that road salt before it gets into our water? That's a solution University of Minnesota researchers are investigating.
I heard the roadside salt application and the pollution it causes to our Twin City metro area from the radio. And then I started to think, what can be the good way to remove this sodium chloride from our environment? We have all the plants growing on the roadside. Why not we just look into the different type of plants and see whether we can remove those the roadside salt with the plants we have in our state. We started this research about 5 years ago, and we first got a couple of undergraduate students who are really interested in this work.
My role in studying salt-absorbing plants is planting different kinds of halophytes, which are plants that can tolerate high salt levels, and seeing how much salt they can absorb into their above-ground biomass, because we want to be able to harvest this above-ground biomass and remove this salt from the environment. So these plants have to be really hardy. They ideally grow really quickly so they can outcompete these more weed-like species that will grow on roadsides and take up salt effectively and not have too much maintenance while we're planting these and harvesting them.
So we're really at the preliminary stages of plants that might be good to take up salt, sequestered in their biomass with its roots or shoots, and the idea of harvesting that material is what makes this research novel. So if the plant grows and dies, we just delayed when the salt ended up in the groundwater, our ditches, someplace else.
We are researching different ways to utilize the biomass because we definitely don't want to just throw it away. So the main kind of focus is looking at the potential for animal feed. If we can harvest this and then give it to animals, that's a high value way of using the biomass, but then also, of course, composting. And then another avenue is looking at burning the biomass for energy and then potentially reusing the salt that's in the ash. So if that ash has a high amount of salt, then we could potentially use that again as de-icing salt.
We've been salting perhaps more than 50 years, and there's a consequence to that salt loading to our lives. Sodium chloride, once it's in solution, nothing stops it. It goes into the ground, it just moves. We've got lakes now that are almost as salty as the ocean. Nothing really grows in it, so if you make it salty enough, it kills all sorts of things. We know it's hard on bodies, hearts and things like that. It'd be no different than what it does to the environment. If you were to drive on any road, look for the first 3 to 6 feet. Do the plants look weird? And maybe they're not weird, they're just different. And the reason they're different is that they're annuals. The salt killed them. So around the university, you can see where we were not supposed to put snow and where they put snow piles. And today, they're not normal turf grass, and you're not going to grow normal turf grass because the salt residue prevents normal things from wanting to establish and persist. You look at a typical roadside, you've got the first flush off the shoulder, and that's the space that I think is most valuable to capture salt before it even gets to the ditch. It's the easiest to manage. We mow it anyway.
MnDOT has a lot of species lists, mixes that we already know will grow pretty well on roadsides, so I would kind of look those up on the internet and just try to find as much information as I could on their salt tolerance. But a lot of these species we just had to test in the greenhouse.
The most promising species are moved to field trials.
The best species right now are actually sunflower and pitseed goosefoot. The annual or common sunflower is a really good species for salt uptake. Unfortunately, it's not a perennial species, so we're actually looking at a lot of different perennial sunflowers because we want these plants to be able to grow right when the snow starts to melt and it's the spring thaw, because that's when the salt concentrations are going to be the highest in the soil. Another species like pitseed goosefoot, it's similar to a weedy species that can grow in our backyards. It's called lamb's quarters. And so it's another annual, but it has pretty good salt uptake. If these plants can at least grow and then drop their seeds and then pop up really early in the spring, then that can also be beneficial too.
Sugar beets are also highly effective, and the plant's leaves can absorb a 20% concentration of sodium chloride. But it isn't a practical crop to plant and harvest on roadsides.
MnDOT's goal is to have a perennial plant mix because we don't want to keep reseeding. We don't have the budgets.
I think turfgrass right now is probably one of the higher potential species of perennials.
Perennial plants around MnDOT's stormwater management ponds are also important for filtering out pollutants.
And if we can get plants to trap some of that, it's going to be a benefit to all of us to have less in our potential surface waters, less in our lakes, rivers, and streams.
Our first LCCMR project was funded for about 3 years, and we just got continued funding for the next 3 years. So the next 3 years will look a lot like exploring more perennials and then looking at wetland species, because we want to target these areas that have a lot more salts in them, like rivers and lakes.
This is hydroponic systems that I'm trying to grow some plants here. The idea of this research is to see what kind of plants can absorb or uptake the salt from the water. When we done with this first step, we're gonna, out of 7 species, we're gonna pick 1 or 2, the best one, and then after that, we move with the habitat.
With our results, we will eventually give MnDOT some recommendations.
And the whole point of this is not just to do research for research's sake, it's to actually implement the results. And that's one of the roles I play at MnDOT, is to take the seed components that work and put it into standard plans, standard seed mixes, for counties, cities, townships, and anyone who wants to participate. So we all benefit from salt, but we should be exploring alternatives. So this doesn't replace salt, but it's part of a series of things that we can do to lower the salt use or capture the salt we've done. For example, alternatives would be to sweep the salt from roads between snow events and reuse it. To create storm drain inlets and not put them under bridges or in shade, put them in sun and let solar heat the area so they don't create a freeze zone or a slippery zone in shaded areas. There are other salt alternatives that are probably less corrosive than sodium chloride, however they cost more money. Sodium chloride rusts steel, but there's other like mag chloride, calcium chloride, which are more expensive, but they rust different things. Copper, aluminum, different metals also rust or oxidize away. So everything we do has some consequence to something. For example, potassium acetate is a really nice de-icing agent, but it's also really hard on oxygen. So when it decomposes by bacteria or fungi or algae, it takes the oxygen out of the receiving waters. One of the ways that we're reducing the salt is precision equipment placement, of using the salt that's needed based on road temperature and the type of road it is, whether it's an interstate, a state road or a county road, to be more precise about the salt application. But there's a point where you can't go any lower and still have the effects that sodium chloride provides on keeping the ice from forming and hopefully a safer transportation system. I have children, and I would really like to have something that isn't messed up. I believe that the things we do today should be solved by the generation that caused the problem. The only important resource we really have, there's two of them, water and soil.
So it's a beautiful fall day, and just to highlight that foraging really truly can be done year-round, all 12 months of the year, all 4 seasons. Today we are sitting beneath a beautiful bur oak tree. Now oak trees produce acorns. Now there's several different varieties of oak trees. All the acorns are edible, but they all vary like in their tannin level. Also, some acorns make better acorn oil for cooking than others. Some make better acorn flour than others. And some, they're considered a sweeter, less tannin-like, less bitter acorn. And the squirrels actually got this right, because those are the ones they're gonna eat first, and then say the acorn from a red oak, they're gonna bury those and eat them in the following spring. So a variety of different acorns, all of which are edible. So just make sure you ID your oak tree, know which kind of acorn you're working with. Today though, we are working with the bur oak. Foraging for acorns is fun, it's relaxing, and you get to understand and maybe learn about the tree from which these lovely acorns are dropping. Acorns were a super important staple food for this country's indigenous peoples. So they have been consumed for a very long, long time. And I grew up believing that all of these acorns were poisonous, which is not true at all. Couldn't be further from true. They are very, very, very good for you. They contain a lot of protein. It's a good source of carbohydrates. So they're packed with nutrients. But when I am out here then foraging for acorns, I'm gonna keep my eyes to the ground. And here, whoops. There we go. All right, so this would be an acorn that I am gonna toss into my basket. It looks good, there's no holes in it. So I'm gonna take that one. This acorn has a hole in it, and that is the work of a weevil. So if you see acorns that do have these holes or cracks, you just wanna toss those aside and keep on going. So then, once you have, a basket, full of some good acorns, you're gonna bring those home and you're gonna roast those in the oven, just like this. We're gonna rinse them and then roast them. And then after you're done roasting them, you are going to take the meaty nut out of the shell, and then you're gonna put that immediately into cool water, and that is gonna be the start of a cold water tannin leaching. And so you're gonna take those bitter components kind of out of the acorn via the water. And what that does is makes the acorns less bitter, but also if you consume a lot of that tannin in your system, that can cause nausea, maybe some illness like vomiting or constipation. And so again, getting those tannins out of the acorn is important if you're going to consume a lot of them. So then after you have them roasted, like I said, you're going to take the meaty nut part out of the shell and you're going to remove any kind of papery husk that is on that meaty part of the nut. So then it's going to look like this. And you're going to toss it into that cool water. And then you're going to begin, could be anywhere from 7 to 14 days of that cool water leaching process. And what you do is you put them in an airtight jar in your refrigerator and then fill it about half with the acorns, half with water, shake it up, and then you're gonna check it every 12 hours and you're gonna add new water. And you'll notice that the old water that you're pouring out is gonna be dark, and that is those tannins coming out of your acorns. Also with the acorns, you know, it's super easy to prepare them. It takes a little bit of time, but it is so worth it. You can roast them with a little bit of salt and have kind of a roasted acorn, or you can grind those bits up and make acorn grits, or you can grind it even further and make acorn flour. Also, acorn oil can be made. So they're very versatile.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, and by Mark and Margaret Yackel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org, and by Live Wide Open, Western Minnesota Prairie Waters, and the members of Pioneer PBS.